The social worker's pen scratched across the intake form with mechanical precision. Each stroke, another measurement of failure. Rachel Torres sat across the metal desk. Her 4 children crowded onto a single plastic chair behind her, their collective silence more damning than any accusation. "Mrs. Torres," the woman began, her voice carrying that particular tone of professional exhaustion that came from processing too many desperate cases. "If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. I need you to understand the situation. The shelter can accommodate you for 72 hours. That's 3 nights. After that, without stable housing, we'll need to initiate protective services protocols." The words hung in the fluorescent-lit office like a death sentence. Rachel's hands clenched in her lap, nails digging into palms already raw from 2 weeks of living in her 15-year-old Suburban. Behind her, she felt rather than heard her oldest daughter Maya's sharp intake of breath. "I'll find something," Rachel said, her voice steadier than she felt. 3 days. I can find something in 3 days. The social worker's expression suggested she'd heard this promise before, from 100 other desperate mothers in 100 other identical situations. She slid a packet of papers across the desk. "These are resources, emergency housing applications, food assistance programs, employment services. I strongly recommend—" "I have a job," Rachel interrupted, the words coming out sharper than intended. "I'm a paralegal. I've been working for 8 years at Morrison and Associates." "Had a job," the social worker corrected gently, consulting her notes. "Your file indicates termination 3 weeks ago due to excessive absences." Rachel's jaw tightened. Those absences had been caring for her youngest, 6-year-old twins, Lily and Lucas, when they'd gotten pneumonia. When the daycare refused to take sick children and she had no family to help, when being a good mother meant losing her livelihood. "I'll find something," she repeated, standing abruptly. "Thank you for your time." Behind her, her children moved with practiced efficiency. Maya, 14, gathered her younger siblings, 12-year-old Sophia, and the 6-year-old twins, with the weary competence of someone who'd grown up too fast. They filed out of the office without complaint, without tears, their silence the most heartbreaking thing of all. The shelter was a converted church basement, rows of cots separated by thin curtains that provided the illusion of privacy. Rachel watched her children claim their assigned spaces, noting how they instinctively positioned themselves close together, creating a protective circle in the chaos of strangers' lives intersecting. "Mom?" Lily's voice was small, uncertain. "Is this like the car? Are we camping again?" The twins had been 4 when Rachel's husband Miguel died in the construction accident. Too young to remember their father, except through photographs and Rachel's carefully curated stories. Too young to understand that their camping adventures in the Suburban these past 2 weeks had been homelessness dressed in maternal fiction. "Just for a few nights, baby," Rachel said, kneeling to pull her daughter close. "Then Mama's going to find us a real home. I promise." That night, lying awake on the thin mattress while her children slept, Rachel allowed herself to confront the mathematics of desperation. The life insurance from Miguel's death had been modest, consumed by medical bills from the twins' premature birth complications. Her savings, carefully accumulated over years of frugal living, had evaporated during the 3 months between losing her job and losing their apartment. She had $247 in her checking account. The Suburban's tank was 3/4 full. Her phone had 2 more days before the prepaid minutes ran out. And in 72 hours, if she hadn't found housing, the state would take her children. The thought sent ice through her veins. Everything she'd endured, the double shifts when Miguel was alive, the grinding poverty after his death, the careful balancing of bills and groceries, and hope, all of it had been to keep her children together, safe, loved. The idea of them scattered into foster care, separated, alone, was simply unthinkable. Dawn came too early, pale light filtering through high basement windows. Rachel woke her children with manufactured cheerfulness, helping them prepare for the day with what few possessions they'd managed to keep. Maya braided Sophia's hair with quiet competence. The twins shared a single comb, taking turns without complaint. "Where are we going today?" Sophia asked, as they walked toward the shelter's dining area for breakfast. "Job hunting," Rachel said firmly. "And house hunting. Today's the day our luck changes." But luck, Rachel had learned, was a luxury reserved for people with safety nets. The morning produced 3 job interviews, receptionist positions offering minimum wage with no benefits, hours that wouldn't cover childcare costs. Each interviewer's eyes traveled from Rachel's worn interview suit to the address she'd listed on applications, the shelter's temporary housing notation that screamed liability. By noon, she'd received 2 polite rejections and 1 promise to be in touch. In the language of professional courtesy, all 3 meant the same thing: no. The afternoon shifted to housing searches, an exercise in mathematical impossibility. Every apartment within her theoretical budget, based on unemployment benefits and the hope of minimum wage work, required first month, last month, security deposit, and proof of employment. The gap between what she had and what she needed might as well have been the Grand Canyon. "Mommy, I'm hungry," Lucas said around 3 o'clock, his small hand tugging her sleeve as they left another property manager's office. Rachel had been rationing their limited funds, allowing herself and the children 1 meal per day at the post shelter, supplementing with whatever cheap groceries she could afford. But seeing her son's drawn face, feeling the tremor of real hunger in his voice, she made a decision. "Pizza," she announced, forcing brightness into her tone. "Let's have a feast." They ate at a small pizzeria, the 6 of them crowded into a booth designed for 4, sharing 2 large pies that consumed $28 of Rachel's remaining funds. Extravagant, irresponsible, necessary. She watched her children eat with genuine appetite for the first time in weeks, saw color return to their faces, heard their laughter over shared jokes and stolen pepperoni slices. "This is the best day," Lily declared, cheese stretching from her mouth to her slice. Rachel's throat closed with emotion. The best day. Pizza in a cheap restaurant while homeless. The gap between childhood innocence and harsh reality had never seemed wider. As they ate, Rachel's attention was caught by a newspaper someone had abandoned in the adjacent booth. Specifically, by a small classified ad circled in red pen. Public action September 15th, 10 a.m. Valley Ridge Observatory. Property and contents. Abandoned structure. Sold ASIS. Minimum bid $500. September 15th was tomorrow. The observatory had been a landmark in Rachel's childhood, perched on a mountain ridge 20 miles outside the city. She remembered school field trips, peering through massive telescopes at distant galaxies. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The dome opening to reveal star-filled skies. The property had been closed for at least 15 years, maybe longer, falling into disrepair when government funding dried up and private investors lost interest. She'd passed it occasionally over the years, noting its increasing decay, broken windows, overgrown grounds, the iconic dome tarnished and still. Minimum bid, $500. Rachel had $219 remaining after the pizza. The absurdity of even considering attending the auction should have been obvious, yet something made her tear out the ad, fold it carefully, and tuck it into her wallet. That evening, after returning to the shelter and settling the children for the night, Rachel sat in the basement's small common area with her laptop purchased second-hand 3 years ago, now moving with arthritic slowness on the shelter's Wi-Fi. She researched the observatory property with the focused intensity of someone grasping at straws while pretending it was a rope. The Valley Ridge Observatory had been built in 1952 by an eccentric millionaire astronomer named Theodore Whitmore. According to archived news articles, Whitmore had been obsessed with mapping distant galaxies, spending his considerable fortune on state-of-the-art equipment. He'd operated the observatory privately for decades before his death in 1998. After Whitmore's death, the property passed through several hands: his estate, a brief stint as a university research facility, an attempted conversion to a tourist attraction that never materialized. Each owner left pieces of equipment behind, finding the specialized astronomical instruments too expensive to move or too outdated to sell. The most recent articles, from 2009, described the property being sealed by the county for unpaid taxes. A legal battle over the estate had dragged on for years, leaving the observatory in bureaucratic limbo. Now, finally, the county was selling it to recoup back taxes. Rachel studied the few available photographs of the property: the main building with its distinctive silver dome, several smaller outbuildings, all surrounded by 53 acres of mountainside. The auction description was brutally honest. Significant structural damage. No utilities. Not suitable for habitation in current condition. Buyer assumes all liability and removal costs. She calculated quickly. Even if she could somehow scrape together $500 for the minimum bid, the property was clearly uninhabitable. No electricity. No water. Probably dangerous. The idea of moving her 4 children into an abandoned observatory was beyond desperate. It was delusional. And yet, the shelter's 3-day limit was now down to 2 days. She had no prospects for employment that would allow her to afford first month's rent anywhere. The social worker's threat of protective services hung over every decision like a guillotine blade. At least the observatory would be shelter, a roof, walls, space away from strangers' eyes and judgment. If she could win the auction for minimum bid, that would leave some funds for basic supplies. They could camp inside the building, use the Suburban for transportation, figure out next steps away from the ticking clock of shelter rules and social services. It was insane. It was dangerous. It was possibly illegal. It might also be the only option that kept her children together. Rachel pulled up her bank account, staring at the number. $219. She'd need to borrow money, but from whom? Her parents had died before Miguel, leaving her truly alone. His family had returned to Mexico after his death, contact dwindling to annual Christmas cards. She had co-workers from the law firm, but those relationships had been professional, superficial, not the kind that survived desperate requests for loans. Can't sleep? Rachel looked up to find another shelter resident, a woman in her 60s with kind eyes and weathered hands, settling into the adjacent chair. Just thinking, Rachel replied. The worst kind of insomnia. The woman introduced herself as Dorothy. 3 weeks here myself, waiting on my disability benefits to process. System moves like molasses uphill. They talked quietly, sharing the peculiar intimacy of strangers in crisis. Dorothy had been a nurse for 40 years before a back injury ended her career. Now she survived on the threadbare safety net of bureaucratic assistance, waiting for paperwork to transform from pending to approved. "You've got that look," Dorothy observed, "like you're planning something either very brave or very stupid." Rachel found herself explaining the auction, the observatory, the desperate mathematics of keeping her children. Dorothy listened without judgment, her expression thoughtful. "How much you got?" she asked finally. $219. "I'd need $500 for the minimum bid, plus something left over for immediate supplies." Dorothy was quiet for a long moment. Then she stood, disappeared toward the cots, and returned carrying a small zippered bag. From it, she extracted $300 in worn bills. "I can't," Rachel started, but Dorothy held up a hand. "Yes, you can. And you will. Consider it a loan, no interest, payable when circumstances improve." Her eyes held Rachel's with fierce intensity. "I've been where you are not with children, thank God, but desperate enough to understand what you're contemplating. That property might be a disaster, but it might also be the breathing room you need to figure things out." Rachel's hands shook as she accepted the money. "I'll pay you back, I promise." "I know you will," Dorothy said simply. "Now, go get some sleep. You've got an auction to win tomorrow." The Valley Ridge Observatory sat at the end of a winding mountain road, accessible only by a single-lane path that switched back on itself 11 times before reaching the summit. Rachel drove slowly, her Suburban laboring up the steep grade, while her children pressed their faces to windows, exclaiming at the increasingly dramatic views. "It's like a castle," Lily breathed as the main building came into view. From a distance, the observatory did have a fairy tale quality, the silver dome rising against blue sky, stone walls suggesting permanence and mystery. Up close, the illusion shattered. Graffiti marred the lower walls. Windows were broken or missing entirely. The grounds were overgrown with 15 years of unchecked vegetation, small trees pushing through cracked pavement. But it was also, Rachel's heart caught beautiful. The bones of the place remained solid, dignified, despite neglect. The dome, though tarnished, showed no major structural damage. The main building's stone construction had weathered abandonment better than modern materials might have. A dozen vehicles were already parked in the lot, their occupants clustered near a temporary tent where auction officials had established their station. Rachel recognized the types: contractors evaluating demolition costs, salvage dealers calculating profit on any remaining equipment, perhaps a few curious locals drawn by nostalgia or the prospect of cheap land. She parked at the lot's edge, instructing her children to remain in the Suburban while she registered for the auction. The process was bureaucratic forms to sign, identification to verify, auction paddle to receive. Rachel's number was 27. "First time at a property auction?" the clerk asked, noting Rachel's uncertainty. "Yes. Pretty straightforward. Auctioneer will describe the property, Open bidding at the minimum $500 in this case. Bide. Increments of $50. When bidding stops, highest paddle wins. Cash or cashier's check required for deposit within 1 hour of winning. Rachel nodded, clutching her paddle with white-knuckled determination. She had Dorothy's $300 plus her own $219. Enough for the minimum bid plus $19 remaining. It would have to be enough. The auctioneer, a portly man with a surprisingly melodious voice, began promptly at 10. He painted an accurate, if dismal, picture of the property. 53 acres, main structure, approximately 8,000 square feet, observatory dome mechanism, non-functional, extensive deferred maintenance, sold entirely as is, with no warranties expressed or implied. Minimum bid $500, he concluded. Do I hear $500? Rachel's hand shot up before her courage could falter. Paddle 27, $500. Do I hear $550? A contractor in the front row raised his paddle lazily. $550. $600. Rachel called out, her voice steadier than her trembling hands. The contractor glanced back at her, assessing. His eyes traveled over her worn clothes, her obvious desperation, and something like pity flickered across his face. He nodded to himself and lowered his paddle, removing himself from bidding. $600 going once, the auctioneer called. Going twice. $650. A new voice interjected. A woman in expensive casual wear, her interest clearly recreational rather than professional. Rachel's stomach clenched. She had $519 total, could only go to $550 maximum, leaving $19. $650, she managed. The recreational bidder smiled, misunderstanding Rachel's tension as competitive spirit. $700. $750. The words came from Rachel's mouth before rational thought could intervene. She was $231 over her available funds. If this bid won, she would default. The property would go to the second highest bidder, and she'd lose her registration deposit. But the number seemed to cross some psychological threshold. The recreational bidder shrugged and stepped back. The contractor remained silent. Around the small crowd, no additional paddles rose. $750 going once, going twice, sold to paddle 27. For a moment, Rachel couldn't breathe. She'd won. She'd also just committed to paying $231 more than she possessed. Her legs felt distant as she approached the payment table, her mind racing through impossible calculations. Could she write a check she didn't have funds to cover? No, that was fraud. Could mean criminal charges. Could she explain her situation and request time? The clerk had been clear. Payment within 1 hour or forfeit. Congratulations, the clerk said, pulling up forms. That's $750 total. How will you be paying? Rachel's voice cracked. Behind her, she heard her children arguing quietly in the Suburban, Maya shushing the twins. They were counting on her. Could I possibly have a few minutes? I need to make a phone call. The clerk's expression suggested this request was irregular, but not unprecedented. You've got until 11 o'clock. That's 47 minutes. Rachel retreated to her vehicle, her mind blank with panic. Who could she call? Who did she even know with $231 to spare on a stranger's desperate auction win? Did we get it? Maya asked hopefully from the back seat. Still working on it, honey. Rachel pulled out her phone, staring at the nearly depleted minutes. She scrolled through her minimal contacts, most numbers obsolete or belonging to people she'd lost touch with years ago. One name stopped her scrolling: Janet Morrison office. Her former boss's wife, the senior partner's spouse, who'd always been kind during firm events. They'd had exactly 3 conversations over the years, polite exchanges at holiday parties, nothing suggesting the kind of relationship that could support a $231 emergency loan request. But Rachel was out of options and time. The call connected on the 3rd ring. "Hello, Mrs. Morrison. This is Rachel Torres. I used to work at your husband's firm." The words tumbled out in a rush. "I know, this is incredibly inappropriate, and you have absolutely no reason to help me. But I'm in an impossible situation, and you're literally the only person I could think to call." There was a pause. Then, cautiously, "Rachel, are you all right?" And somehow, standing in a parking lot on a mountain with her homeless children, watching from a Suburban, held together by hope and duct tape, Rachel found herself telling the truth. Not the sanitized version she'd told social workers and potential employers, but the raw reality: Miguel's death, the job loss, the shelter, the children, the auction, the $231 gap between winning and losing everything. "I'm sorry," she finished, wiping at tears with her sleeve. "I shouldn't have called. I didn't know what else to do." Another pause. Then, "What's the address?" 26 minutes later, a silver Mercedes navigated the mountain switchbacks, pulling into the lot beside Rachel's Suburban. Janet Morrison emerged wearing designer jeans and a concerned expression, carrying a purse that probably cost more than Rachel's monthly salary had been. "Show me," she said, without preamble. Together they walked the property while Rachel explained her desperate logic: the shelter's deadline, protective services, the need for any space that kept her children together. Janet listened without interruption, her sharp eyes cataloging the building's condition with unsettling accuracy. "It's a disaster," she finally said. "I know. There's no power, no water, probably structural issues I can't even see. I know. Bringing 4 children here would be—" Janet paused, choosing words carefully. "Extremely challenging." "I know," Rachel repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. "But it's mine. Or it could be. It's space and time. That's all I'm asking the universe, for enough space and time to figure out the next step without someone taking my children." Janet pulled out her phone, making a call. "James, it's me. I need you to do something without asking questions." "Yes, now. Valley Ridge Observatory property auction. There's a payment that needs to be made." She glanced at Rachel. "How much exactly?" $231. "Make it $500. For supplies." Janet rattled off the clerk's information, then ended the call. She turned to Rachel with an expression that mixed sympathy and something like admiration. "You have 1 hour to load your children and possessions into that building before I regret this decision and call protective services myself." Rachel's knees nearly buckled. "I can't. I'll pay you back. I swear." "Yes, you will," Janet said firmly. "But not in money. You'll pay me back by keeping those children safe, finding your footing, and proving that this insane gamble was the right call. Understood?" "Yes, ma'am." Janet's expression softened marginally. "And, Rachel, for what it's worth, I've seen a lot of mothers in difficult situations through our firm's pro bono work. Most give up or give in. What you're doing here, This stubborn refusal to let circumstances defeat you. That's not desperation. That's courage. Within the hour, Rachel owned the Valley Ridge Observatory. The deed transferred with surprising efficiency once payment cleared. The county eager to be rid of a property that had consumed resources for 15 years. She was handed a single key, large, old-fashioned, iron, and a stack of documents outlining her new responsibilities, tax obligations, and liability waivers. "Good luck," the auctioneer said, and his tone suggested she would need it. Rachel returned to the Suburban, where her children waited with expressions ranging from hopeful to anxious. Maya, always perceptive, had clearly overheard enough to understand the situation's precariousness. "Is it ours?" she asked quietly. "It's ours," Rachel confirmed. Then, gathering them close, "I need you all to listen carefully. This isn't going to be easy. The building is old and damaged. We don't have electricity or running water. It's going to take work, a lot of work, to make it even minimally comfortable, but it's ours. No one can take it away. No one can tell us to leave. We have time now, time to fix things, to figure things out, to be together." "Like camping?" Lucas asked hopefully. "Exactly like camping," Rachel agreed, choosing to embrace the fiction. "A great adventure." They approached the main entrance together, Rachel's hand shaking slightly as she inserted the iron key into the weathered lock. The mechanism resisted, stiff from years of disuse, then suddenly turned with a heavy click. The door swung inward on protesting hinges. Inside, afternoon light filtered through broken windows, illuminating a scene of magnificent decay. The main floor was a single, vast, circular room, the base of the observatory dome, with high ceilings and walls lined with built-in cabinets and shelving. Dust lay thick over everything, and debris scattered the floor, evidence of vandals and weather damage. But the space itself was breathtaking, the dome overhead rising like a cathedral ceiling. "It's huge," Sophia breathed. "And it's ours," Maya added, her arm protective around her younger sister. They explored methodically, Rachel cataloging needs and dangers with practiced efficiency. The ground floor appeared structurally sound despite cosmetic damage. A metal staircase spiraled upward to the observation level, where the dome mechanism sat frozen in partial opening, revealing a slice of sky. Several smaller rooms branched off the main space, former offices, storage areas. A surprisingly intact bathroom whose fixtures, while ancient, still seemed functional. "No water means no toilet," Rachel noted aloud, adding that to the growing mental list of problems requiring immediate solutions. They spent the remaining daylight hours transferring their minimal possessions from the Suburban into the driest, most sheltered corner of the main room. Sleeping bags, clothing, a few toys, and books that children had clung to through displacements. The pathetic pile that represented their entire material existence barely occupied a 6-foot radius. As darkness fell, Rachel lit the camping lanterns she'd purchased months ago during better times, creating a warm circle of light in the vast space. They ate a cold dinner of peanut butter sandwiches and apples purchased with the last of Janet's additional $500, while Rachel outlined their immediate priorities. "Tomorrow, we tackle basics," she said, projecting confidence she didn't entirely feel. "We need to make this space cleaner and safer. We need to figure out water. There's probably a well somewhere on the property. And we need to seal the worst of the broken windows before weather becomes a problem." "What about school?" Maya asked. The semester had started 2 weeks ago. Her younger siblings had been marked as extended absences. Maya, having just started high school, had simply stopped attending when they'd become homeless. Rachel's chest tightened. Adding educational neglect to their legal vulnerabilities could strengthen any case for removing the children. "I'll call the district tomorrow, explain our situation, request homeschool status temporarily while we establish residency here." It was another gamble in a sequence of increasingly desperate bets. But they'd made it through the day. They had shelter, food for tomorrow, and time before the next crisis. That night, huddled together in sleeping bags on the cold observatory floor, listening to wind whistle through broken windows and the building settle around them, Rachel held her children close and made silent promises to the universe, to Miguel, to herself, to whatever force might be listening. She would make this work. Somehow, impossibly, she would transform this abandoned wreck into something resembling home. Her children would stay together, safe, loved. The mountain of obstacles ahead, restoring utilities, establishing residency, finding income, navigating bureaucracy, would be faced one step at a time. "Mom," Lily's sleepy voice drifted up from Rachel's arms. "This is better than the shelter, right? So much better, baby. We're going to be okay here, I promise." And as Rachel finally surrendered to exhausted sleep, her last conscious thought was of the iron key now hanging on a cord around her neck. 53 acres, 8,000 square feet, theirs. Against all odds, impossibly, miraculously theirs. The first week at the observatory passed in a blur of desperate improvisation and small victories. Rachel woke each morning before dawn, her body protesting the hard floor despite the sleeping bag's minimal cushioning, and faced the day's overwhelming task list with grim determination. Water became the first priority. On their second day, Rachel and Maya located the old well behind one of the outbuildings, a stone-lined shaft with a manual pump that groaned but still functioned after aggressive priming. The water that finally flowed ran brownish at first, clearing to pale amber after several minutes of pumping. Rachel boiled it carefully over a camping stove before allowing anyone to drink, her paralegal training kicking in with research about water safety and testing. "We need to get this tested," she told Maya, filling plastic bottles for a sample. "But boiled water is better than nothing." They established routines with military precision: morning, water collection, and boiling for the day's needs. Afternoon, cleaning and organizing their living space. Evening, meal preparation and planning for the next day. The children adapted with resilience that simultaneously filled Rachel with pride and broke her heart. Sophia appointed herself chief organizer, arranging their minimal possessions with creative efficiency. The twins created elaborate imaginative games, transforming the circular main room into whatever fantasy required: castle, spaceship, underwater kingdom. Maya, increasingly somber, beyond her 14 years, took on responsibilities without being asked, watching her younger siblings while Rachel addressed adult problems. On day 3, Rachel drove into town to handle immediate bureaucratic necessities. At the school district office, she explained their situation with carefully calibrated honesty: new residence, temporary homeschool status, requested while establishing household stability. The administrator, a tired woman who'd clearly processed countless similar disruptions, approved the paperwork with minimal questions. You'll need to submit curriculum plans within 30 days, she warned, and the children will be tested quarterly to ensure adequate progress. Understood, Rachel agreed, adding, develop homeschool curriculum to her impossible list. At the county clerk's office, she updated their address to the observatory's location, establishing legal residency. The clerk raised eyebrows at the infamous property, but processed the change without comment. Her phone, down to its last day of service, rang as she left the building. An unknown number. Rachel answered with trepidation. Mrs. Torres, this is Dr. Elizabeth Chen from County Health Services. We received a referral regarding your family's living situation at the Valley Ridge Observatory property. Rachel's stomach plummeted. Someone had reported them already. Yes? I'd like to schedule a home visit. Tomorrow morning would work for my schedule. Is 10 o'clock convenient? There was no point refusing. Declining a health inspection would only escalate official concern. 10 o'clock is fine. That evening, after the children were asleep, Rachel sat alone in the darkness of their vast circular room, illuminated only by a camping lantern, and confronted the reality of their situation. A county health inspector would see everything: the broken windows, the lack of functioning utilities, the makeshift camping conditions, the impossibility of what she was attempting. They would take her children. Of course they would. No reasonable official could tour this wreck and determine it suitable for housing 4 minors. Rachel's hands clenched in her lap. She'd come so far, gambled everything, and still, it wouldn't be enough. The universe, it seemed, had limits to its generosity. Can't sleep? Rachel startled, turning to find Maya emerging from the shadows, wrapped in a blanket. Just thinking, Rachel said. The same lie she'd told at the shelter. Maya settled beside her mother, their shoulders touching. I heard you on the phone. Someone's coming tomorrow. County health inspector. They sat in silence, both understanding the implications. We could run, Maya offered quietly. Pack up tonight. Be gone before they come. And go where? Another shelter? Sleep in the Suburban until the gas runs out? Rachel shook her head. No more running, Mija. We stand here. We show them we're making this work. And if they still take you, her voice caught, then, at least, we tried every possible option first. Maya's hand found Rachel's in the darkness, their fingers interlacing. I don't want to leave you, or my sisters and brother. We're supposed to be together. I know, baby. I know. They sat, holding hands in the darkness, until the lantern's fuel finally exhausted, leaving them in absolute black beneath the partially open dome, where distant stars viewed their human drama with ancient indifference. Dr. Elizabeth Chen arrived precisely at 10 in a county vehicle, her clipboard and official demeanor announcing her purpose before introductions. Rachel had prepared the children with careful instructions. Be polite. Be honest. Show the inspector everything she asked to see. Mrs. Torres. Doctor. Chen's handshake was professional, her expression neutral. She was younger than Rachel expected, perhaps in her 30s, with kind eyes that seemed at odds with her clipboard authority. Thank you for coming, Rachel said, as if this visit were voluntary, rather than potentially life-destroying. Dr. Chen began her inspection methodically, documenting conditions with practiced efficiency. Rachel watched the woman's pen move across forms, each notation another measurement of their inadequacy. No electricity, check. No functioning plumbing, check. Temporary shelter conditions, check. 4 minor children. Check. But Dr. Chen also noticed other details. The meticulously organized living area, the carefully boiled water in covered containers, the food supplies stored properly away from potential contamination, the sleeping spaces arranged for warmth and safety, the children's clean appearances despite difficult circumstances. This is the well, Rachel explained, leading Dr. Chen outside to demonstrate their water source. I've been boiling everything. I have samples. I need to get tested for safety. Dr. Chen examined the well, made notes, asked technical questions about boiling duration and storage practices. Her expression remained carefully neutral. They returned to the main building where the children had been instructed to wait. Dr. Chen asked to speak with each child individually, a development that sent Rachel's anxiety into overdrive. But she complied, stepping outside with the twins and Sophia, while Dr. Chen spoke privately with Maya. 20 minutes later, all interviews complete, Dr. Chen returned to where Rachel waited with mounting dread. Mrs. Torres, I need to be direct with you. This property, in its current state, is not suitable for habitation. The lack of utilities, the structural concerns, the safety hazards, all represent significant issues. Rachel's world narrowed to a pinpoint. I understand. I'm working on. Dr. Chen held up a hand. However, what I observed today was a family in crisis, making extraordinary efforts to maintain stability. Your children are clean, fed, and clearly loved. They speak about feeling safer here than in transitional housing. Most importantly, you have legal occupancy of this property and are actively working to improve conditions. She consulted her clipboard. I'm prepared to give you 60 days, 2 months, to make specific improvements. Running water from a tested, safe source, weatherproofing of your living area, a functional sanitation solution, proof of educational programming for the children. If these benchmarks are met, I can certify this as adequate temporary housing while you continue longer-term improvements. Rachel's knees nearly buckled with relief. 60 days. Yes, I can do that. I'll be back in 30 days for a progress check. If I see meaningful movement toward these goals, I'll schedule the final inspection for day 60. But Mrs. Torres, Dr. Chen's kind eyes held firm warning. I'm taking a significant professional risk here. Don't make me regret it. After Dr. Chen departed, Rachel gathered her children and shared the reprieve they'd been granted. 2 months, 60 days to transform this wreck into brace, something defensible as housing. The task seemed impossible, but impossible had become their specialty. We need a plan, Maya said, her organizational instincts kicking in. They spent the afternoon creating lists, materials needed, skills required, timeline for each improvement. The problems were staggering, but breaking them into components made them fractionally less overwhelming. Water testing and treatment system, research required, possible grant programs for well rehabilitation, window repair, could salvage materials, learn basic carpentry, sanitation, research composting toilet systems, grey water handling. The longer-term restoration needs remain daunting: electrical system, heating, roof repairs. But Rachel forced herself to focus on Dr. Chen's specific requirements. 2 months, 4 major improvements. They could do this. That evening, as darkness fell and the children settled into their routines, Rachel stood at one of the broken windows, staring out at the mountain landscape. Somewhere in the distance, the lights of the city glowed against the darkening sky. The world she'd fallen out of. The normal life that seemed increasingly remote. Behind her, she heard her children's voices, Maya reading to the twins, Sophia practicing math problems by lantern light. The quiet domestic sounds of family persisting against impossible odds. Rachel touched the iron key still hanging around her neck. They had a home. Barely, precariously, but genuinely. They had time. 60 days, but also infinite potential in each one. They had each other. Above all, always, they had each other. Whatever happened next, however the universe chose to test them, Rachel swore she would prove Dr. Chen's faith justified. This abandoned observatory, with its tarnished dome and damaged walls, would become their sanctuary. Not someday, not in some distant future after lottery wins or miraculous interventions, but through her own hands, her determination, her refusal to accept defeat. The mountain night wind whispered through the broken windows, carrying the scent of pine and possibility. Rachel closed her eyes, feeling Miguel's presence in that wind, not haunting, but supporting, his love persisting beyond death, in the family they'd created together. "I'm going to do this," she whispered to the darkness, to Miguel, to herself. "Watch me." The weeks that followed tested Rachel in ways that made her previous struggles seem merely preparatory. Each day began before dawn and ended long after dark, every hour consumed by the crushing weight of improvement deadlines. The children's education, normally provided by schools and professionals, now fell entirely to Rachel during evening hours after full days of construction work. But momentum, once established, carried its own power. Rachel discovered reserves of determination she hadn't known existed, fueled by the stakes of her children's futures and the ticking clock of Dr. Chen's 30-day progress check. Water became the first success. Using library computers during supply trips to town, Rachel researched well rehabilitation and water treatment. She learned about sediment filters, UV sterilization, and storage tank sanitization through YouTube videos and extension service documents. With her remaining funds from Janet's gift dwindling rapidly, she prioritized a basic filtration system and testing supplies. The well water, when finally tested, showed bacterial levels requiring treatment, but no heavy metals or chemical contamination. Using food-grade bleach in carefully calculated quantities, Rachel shocked the well system, flushed it repeatedly, and retested until results showed safe levels. She installed a simple filtration setup salvaged from a camping supply store's clearance section, not perfect, but functional and certifiable. "We have clean water," she announced to her children on day 12, pumping the handle with ceremonial satisfaction as clear, safe water flowed into their collection bucket. Real, safe, drinkable water from our own well. The children cheered as if she'd delivered them to paradise. Such small victories, Rachel reflected, took on outsized significance when you'd been denied them long enough. Windows proved more challenging. Rachel had zero carpentry experience, but YouTube and public library books became her teachers. She learned to measure, cut, and install plastic sheeting as temporary weatherproofing, not elegant, but effective against wind and rain. Several outbuildings yielded salvageable wood that she cut into basic frames, creating crude but functional barriers. Maya proved unexpectedly skilled at precise measuring, her mathematical mind adapting to practical application. Together, They weatherproofed the main living area, then tackled the smaller rooms one by one. By day 20, the howling drafts had diminished significantly, and their sleeping area retained heat from the camping stove with new efficiency. Sanitation required research that made Rachel grateful for her paralegal background in navigating bureaucratic documentation. She discovered that county regulations allowed composting toilet systems if properly designed and maintained. Using plans from sustainable living websites, she constructed a basic composting toilet in one of the small outbuildings, complete with ventilation and a covering system that managed odors better than she'd dared hope. "It's not a bathroom like before," she explained to the twins, who regarded the new facility with suspicion, "but it's clean and private, and much better than alternatives." Lucas, ever practical, simply shrugged. "It's like camping." Their repeated acceptance of hardship as adventure simultaneously warmed and broke Rachel's heart. Children, she'd learned, were infinitely adaptable when given no alternative, a blessing that also felt like a terrible responsibility. Education emerged as the most emotionally demanding requirement. Rachel cobbled together curriculum, from free online resources, library books, and her own remembered lessons from years past. Maya's high school coursework proved manageable, self-motivated, and intellectually curious. She largely taught herself using borrowed textbooks and Khan Academy videos on library computers. Sophia, in 6th grade, required more structured guidance. Rachel instituted mandatory educational hours each afternoon, teaching math, science, and language arts, while Sophia completed assignments in notebooks purchased with their last grocery money. The girls' enthusiasm for learning, undimmed by their circumstances, made the effort easier. The twins presented unique challenges. At 6, they needed foundational instruction in reading and mathematics that Rachel felt woefully unqualified to provide. But each evening after dinner, she sat with them by lantern light, sounding out words, counting objects, building skills, one patient lesson at a time. "You're doing good, Mama," Lily said one night, patting Rachel's hand with unconscious reassurance. "You're a good teacher." Rachel had to turn away to hide tears. Good teacher, good mother, good provider. The labels felt like ill-fitting clothes, always slipping, never quite covering all the exposed inadequacies. But she was trying. God, she was trying. On day 28, Rachel made another supply trip to town, her funds now dangerously depleted despite careful rationing. She needed documentation for Dr. Chen's visit, water test results, receipts for materials, proof of educational progress. At the general store, filling a basket with bare essentials, she encountered Janet Morrison examining organic produce, with the careful attention of someone for whom grocery shopping was leisure rather than survival calculation. "Rachel." Janet's expression cycled through surprise, concern, and something like relief. "I've been thinking about you. How's the observatory?" Rachel provided a carefully edited update, emphasizing progress while minimizing ongoing struggles. Janet listened with the focused attention Rachel remembered from their previous encounter, her sharp eyes reading between careful words. "Show me," Janet said, not a request, but a gentle command. "I need to see what my investment supported." 20 minutes later, Janet's Mercedes once again navigated the mountain switchbacks, following Rachel's Suburban to their mountain sanctuary. Rachel felt her anxiety spike. The property, while improved, remained obviously marginal by normal standards. What would Janet see? A heroic effort or a tragic delusion? But walking through the main living area, viewing the weatherproofed windows and organized spaces, examining the well system and composting toilet, Janet's expression showed only approval. "You've done remarkable work," she said finally. "I expected honestly. I'm not sure what I expected, but this exceeds it." Rachel felt tears threatening again. She'd become such a crier lately. Emotions always too close to the surface. "We have the 30-day inspection tomorrow. I think we'll pass." But you're running out of money," Janet finished. "And passing inspections doesn't solve the larger question of sustainable income and long-term improvements." "Yes." Rachel's voice came out barely audible. Janet was quiet for a moment, surveying the vast circular room with its soaring dome. When she spoke, her tone carried the businesslike confidence of someone accustomed to solving problems. "My husband's firm does pro bono work. You mentioned you were a paralegal still licensed." "Yes, technically. I let my certifications lapse for cost reasons, but the knowledge doesn't expire. We have remote contract positions, document review, basic research, filing preparation, flexible hours, decent pay. Not enough for luxury, but enough to survive while you sort this out." Janet met Rachel's eyes directly. "Interested?" Rachel's world tilted slightly. "Real income, legitimate work, the possibility of sustainability beyond desperate day-to-day survival." "Yes. Absolutely yes." "Good. I'll speak with James tonight. Expect a call tomorrow." Janet paused at her car, looking back at the observatory with an expression Rachel couldn't quite read. "You know, this building has been a blight on county records for 15 years. Everyone saw it as a problem needing expensive solutions. It took someone desperate enough to see it as possibility." After Janet departed, Rachel stood alone in the clearing, processing this unexpected development. A job, not certain yet, contingent on James Morrison's approval, but possible. The first genuine positive development in months that wasn't simply the absence of catastrophe. That night, gathering her children after dinner, Rachel shared their news, the potential employment, the inspection tomorrow, the progress they'd made together. "We're going to be okay," she said, feeling the truth of it for the first time since Miguel's death. "It won't be easy. We have years of work ahead, but we're going to make it." Dr. Chen's 30-day inspection the following morning went smoothly. She documented improvements with evident approval, taking photographs of the well system, weatherproofed windows, and sanitation facility. She interviewed each child again, noting their educational progress and general well-being. "I'm impressed, Mrs. Torres," she said, finalizing her report. "You've exceeded minimum requirements in several areas. I'm certifying continued occupancy contingent on the 60-day final inspection. But honestly, I don't anticipate problems." "Thank you," Rachel managed through the tightness in her throat, "for giving us the chance." "Thank yourself. I only provided time. You did the work." Dr. Chen paused at her vehicle. "For what it's worth, I've been doing this job for 8 years. I've seen every variation of family crisis and housing inadequacy. What you're building here isn't about the structure. It's about refusing to let circumstances defeat your family. That's rarer than you'd think." That afternoon, James Morrison called. The contract position was approved, starting immediately at $25 per hour, billed weekly for work completed. 20 hours per week, minimum. Flexible scheduling to accommodate her situation. The income wouldn't make them wealthy, but it would cover basics, food, supplies, slow improvements to the property. Janet spoke highly of your determination, James said. We value that quality. Do good work, meet deadlines, and this arrangement can continue indefinitely. Rachel's hands shook as she disconnected the call. Stable income, legitimate employment, the foundation for actual planning beyond crisis management. The celebration that evening was modest, a real dinner of pasta and sauce purchased without anxiety about the cost, eaten by all 6 of them together under lantern light, while the children shared their day's adventures and educational achievements. "Mom?" Maya asked as they cleaned up afterward. "Are we really going to be okay now?" Rachel looked at her oldest daughter, so much responsibility carried on such young shoulders, aging her before her time. She wanted to promise certainty, to guarantee a future without more struggles. But Rachel had learned the dangers of promises the universe wouldn't necessarily honor. "We're going to keep fighting," she said instead. "Some days will be hard, some days will be better, but we'll face them together, in our home, as a family. That's the best I can promise, and the most important thing of all." The following weeks established new rhythms as Rachel balanced remote paralegal work against ongoing property improvements. She worked during early mornings before the children woke and late evenings after they slept. Her laptop, powered by a portable generator she'd purchased with her first paycheck. The work itself felt like returning to familiar territory after months of wilderness. Document, review, legal research, filing preparation tasks, her trained mind handled with efficiency that apparently satisfied the Morrison firm. Her first few weeks of billing were approved without comment, payment deposited to her account with blessed reliability. With stable income established, Rachel began planning longer-term improvements. The dome mechanism, frozen for unknown years, called to her during quiet moments. The structure was supposedly the property's centerpiece, its entire purpose. Learning its secrets felt like an obligation to Theodore Whitmore's original vision. On a clear Saturday afternoon in early November, Rachel left the children with Maya supervising and climbed the spiral staircase to the observation platform for the first time. She'd been so focused on survival-level repairs that she'd never fully explored this upper level. The platform, while dusty, showed less damage than ground floor areas. The dome mechanism dominated the space. Massive gears, counterweights, and a complex opening system, all designed to reveal sky for astronomical observation. At the platform's center stood the telescope itself, a massive instrument beneath a protective canvas cover. Rachel circled the machinery, trying to understand its operation. Metal panels bore labels in faded paint: motor control, emergency manual override, counterweight release. Without electrical power, the motorized system was useless. But the manual override suggested mechanical operation might be possible. She found a lever marked Emergency Manual, protected by a safety cover. Removing the cover required no tools, just determination. The lever itself resisted when Rachel attempted to move it, frozen by years of corrosion and seized mechanisms. But something in Rachel, some combination of curiosity and stubborn refusal to accept impossible, made her persist. She applied steady pressure, working the lever back and forth in tiny increments, feeling something gradually give way inside the system, machinery. Without warning, a deep, metallic groan echoed through the structure. The dome shuddered, and through gaps in the mechanism, Rachel glimpsed movement. Somewhere, in the complex system, counterweights had shifted, engaging gears that began impossibly, miraculously to turn. The dome was opening. Rachel stumbled back as the massive structure overhead began to separate, revealing growing sections of afternoon sky. The movement was jerky, protesting, accompanied by sounds of neglected machinery forced into operation. But it moved. After 15 years of frozen stillness, the Valley Ridge Observatory dome was opening. She watched in awe as the mechanism completed its cycle, leaving the dome fully parted overhead, the entire sky visible from the platform. The view was breathtaking: mountains stretching to distant horizons, autumn colors painting forests in brilliant reds and golds, sky so blue it hurt to look at directly. "Mom," Maya's distant voice carried from below. "Mom, what's happening?" Rachel descended the stairs, emerging to find all 4 children in the courtyard, staring upward at the transformed dome. "It's open," Sophia breathed. "I got it open," Rachel corrected, still somewhat stunned by the success. "The manual override still works." That evening, after sunset, Rachel gathered her children on the observation platform. She'd removed the canvas covering from the telescope, a massive refractor with brass fittings and optics that, despite years of neglect, retained surprising clarity. The instrument clearly required professional restoration. Its tracking mechanisms were frozen, its precise calibrations probably useless. But the core optics, protected by the sealed tube, remained functional enough for basic viewing. Rachel aimed the telescope at the rising moon with crude adjustments, then stepped back. "Look," she said simply. One by one, her children took turns peering through the eyepiece, gasping at the magnified view craters and mountains rendered in sharp detail. The familiar moon transformed into an alien landscape of shadows and reflected sunlight. "It's beautiful," Lucas whispered, his 6-year-old's vocabulary inadequate for expressing wonder at viewing another world. As her children explored the night sky with childlike enthusiasm, Rachel found herself overwhelmed by the moment's symbolism. They had fallen so far, lost so much, struggled through ordeals that would have defeated stronger families. Yet here they stood in an observatory they owned, viewing distant stars through an instrument designed for precisely that purpose, having transformed abandonment into something approaching hope. The dome, damaged and neglected for 15 years, had opened. Their lives, damaged and neglected by circumstance, were similarly opening to new possibilities. The parallel felt too perfect to be coincidence, more like message, validation that their stubborn refusal to accept defeat had earned cosmic approval. "Make wish," Rachel told her children, pointing at a shooting star, streaking across the visible sky. She made her own silent wish, not for wealth or ease, but for continuation of this moment's peace, for her children's safety and growth, for strength to face whatever challenges remained, for Miguel to know, wherever he existed beyond this life, that his family persisted, adapted, survived. The universe, indifferent to human struggles and hopes, nevertheless provided its constant gift, the stars wheeling overhead in their ancient patterns, offering perspective on humanity's tiny dramas played out against infinite time and space. Winter arrived early on the mountain, testing their preparations with an October snowstorm that blanketed the observatory grounds in 8 inches of heavy, wet snow. Rachel woke to the twins' delighted shrieks, watching them press faces to now intact windows, marveling at the transformed landscape. But delight quickly gave way to practical concerns. The camping stove that had served them through autumn proved inadequate against genuine cold. Their weatherproofed main room retained some heat, but the temperature hovered barely above freezing despite constant stove operation. "We need real heat," Rachel acknowledged to Maya as they huddled near the small burner. The other children wrapped in every blanket they possessed. "This worked for fall, but winter will kill us." She'd been dreading this necessity. The observatory's original heating system was defunct, requiring electrical power they didn't have, and repairs beyond her budget. Alternatives like wood stoves required proper venting and installation, both expensive and technically complex. Rachel spent the morning researching solutions on her laptop while her children did lessons wrapped in sleeping bags. Propane heaters emerged as the most feasible option, portable, relatively safe if properly ventilated, and within financial reach if she allocated funds carefully. That afternoon, during a break in the storm, Rachel drove into town and purchased 2 propane heaters, plus sufficient fuel canisters to last several weeks. The expense consumed most of her recent paycheck, but warmth wasn't negotiable. They could reduce other costs to compensate. The heaters transformed their living situation immediately. Positioned strategically with windows cracked for ventilation, they raised the main room temperature to genuinely comfortable levels. That evening, the children shed their constant blanket cocoons, moving freely in regular clothing for the first time in days. "It's warm," Lily said with such simple satisfaction that Rachel felt tears threatening again. The next morning brought Dr. Chen's 60-day final inspection. Rachel met her at the entrance, noting the inspector's surprise at the open dome overhead. "You've been busy," Dr. Chen observed. The inspection proceeded with careful documentation. Clean water system, approved. Weatherproofed living spaces, approved. Functional sanitation, approved. Educational progress for all 4 children, approved. Heat source adequate for winter, approved. Standing in the main room with her clipboard complete, Dr. Chen's professional demeanor softened slightly. "Mrs. Torres, I'm certifying this property as adequate housing. You've met and exceeded every benchmark. I'll be filing a recommendation with Family Services to close your case." Rachel's knees went weak. "Close the case? You're no longer at risk of Protective Services intervention. Your children are safe, educated, and thriving under difficult circumstances. My job here is complete." Dr. Chen extended her hand for a formal shake. "Congratulations, you did something remarkable." After the inspector departed, Rachel gathered her children and shared the news they were officially, legally, permanently together. No more threats of separation, no more social service monitoring. They'd proven their impossible arrangement viable. The celebration was jubilant, the children whooping and dancing around the circular room, while Rachel laughed and cried simultaneously. Years of tension, finally, releasing. That evening, Rachel climbed to the observation platform alone, seeking quiet moment to process the day's significance. She opened the dome with increasing familiarity, the mechanism responding more smoothly after several uses, its years of frozen stillness gradually easing. Standing beneath the winter stars, Rachel reflected on the 3 months since purchasing this property. They'd arrived with nothing, homeless, desperate, grasping at any option that might keep them together. They'd endured doubt, hardship, and challenges that would have justified surrender. Yet here they stood, fed, warm, safe, legal, together. The stars overhead blazed with cold brilliance, indifferent as always to human drama. But Rachel felt Miguel's presence in their light, not ghostly or sorrowful, but approving, proud. This stubborn survival, this refusal to let circumstances defeat their family, honored everything they'd built together during his life. "We made it, mi amor," she whispered to the stars, to Miguel, to the universe. "Our family survived." A shooting star streaked across the visible sky, gone almost before perception registered it. Rachel smiled, choosing to interpret it as confirmation, message received, approval granted, continue forward. Below, she heard her children's voices through the open dome. Maya reading bedtime stories to the twins, while Sophia practiced her violin on the battered instrument purchased from a thrift store. Normal domestic sounds, the music of family persisting despite everything. Rachel descended the stairs to rejoin them, but paused halfway down, arrested by sudden impulse. The observation platform had a feature she'd noted, but never fully examined: a small sealed door built into the floor near the telescope base. In the chaos of survival, she'd assumed it led to some mechanical access or storage compartment. Now, with basic crises resolved and time to properly explore their property, curiosity overcame distraction. The door bore a simple latch, stiff but functional. Rachel opened it to reveal a ladder descending into darkness below. She retrieved a flashlight and carefully climbed down, finding herself in a small sealed room, directly beneath the telescope, an interior space, insulated by the main building's walls, but separate from the ground floor chambers they'd been occupying. The room, perhaps 10 feet square, appeared designed for precise environmental control. Thick insulation lined the walls, and ventilation shafts suggested climate regulation capability. In the flashlight beam, Rachel saw metal shelving along one wall, stacked with storage containers. She approached the nearest shelf, examining the containers with growing confusion. They were sealed metal cases, each labeled in careful script: photographic plates, M51. Spectroscopic, data Andromeda. Mapping project, Orion Nebula. Rachel opened one case carefully, finding it packed with vintage astronomical equipment: glass photographic plates capturing star fields, measurement instruments, detailed observation logs in Theodore Whitmore's handwriting. The room was an archive, decades of astronomical work, carefully preserved against time's decay. But as Rachel's flashlight swept across the back wall, her beam caught something else. More cases, larger, different in construction. These bore no astronomical labels, just dates and the notation, "Personal Archive." She lifted one case onto a small work table, clearly designed for examination purposes. Inside, she found not astronomical data but personal documents: Whitmore's financial records, correspondence, and detailed journals. Rachel began reading, initially from curiosity about the observatory's original owner. What emerged was a portrait of a complex man, brilliant, isolated, obsessed with his astronomical work, to the point of social disconnect. Whitmore had inherited significant wealth from family patents in optical equipment, then invested it entirely in his mountain observatory. The later journals, written in the years before his death, took on different tone. Whitmore described his isolation with regret, his recognition that he'd valued stars over people, data over relationships. He wrote of attempting to reconnect with distant family, of being rebuffed by relatives who saw him only as a reclusive embarrassment. I have mapped galaxies, but failed to navigate human connections. One entry read, "My fortune, considerable by any measure, will pass to people who despise me simply because genetic chance made us relatives. None of them share my passion, my wonder at the cosmos. My life's work will be dismantled, sold, forgotten." Rachel continued reading, drawn deeper into the old astronomer's story. Whitmore had tried to will his estate to astronomical institutions, but legal challenges from family members had tied everything in bureaucratic knots. He died knowing his work would be fought over by people who cared nothing for its value. In one of the final journals, dated just weeks before his death, Whitmore described a different plan. "I cannot stop my relatives from claiming this property. Legal realities override my wishes. But I can ensure certain assets remain protected for whoever might eventually restore this place with proper appreciation." Rachel's pulse quickened. Protected assets? She opened more personal archive cases systematically, finding increasingly valuable contents: stock certificates, bonds, investment documentation, all carefully preserved in climate-controlled storage, representing portions of Whitmore's wealth he'd apparently hidden from estate proceedings. One case, larger than the others and sealed with wax, bore a label in Whitmore's handwriting, "For the Future Observer." Rachel broke the seal carefully, opening the case to reveal a letter resting atop more documents. "To whoever finds this. If you're reading this, you've done what I hoped, restored the Valley Ridge Observatory to functional operation. The dome opens. The telescope views. Someone cared enough about this place to make it live again. My relatives, who will inherit this property through legal mechanisms I cannot prevent, care only for immediate value. They'll see demolition costs, tax burdens, liability. They won't see wonder, but someone will. Eventually, someone will recognize this place as sanctuary rather than burden. When that person arrives, and I believe they will, they deserve more than a building. They deserve the resources to maintain it, to continue the work, to prove that pursuing knowledge and beauty matters more than expedient profit. The documents in this case represent approximately 1/3 of my estate, carefully separated from official probate through legal structures my relatives' attorneys were too lazy to discover. Treasury bonds, stock, certificates, and property deeds all held in trust, pending the restoration conditions outlined in the attached documentation. Restore the observatory, open the dome, view the stars. When these conditions are met, these assets become the property of the current legal owner. The universe is vast, indifferent to our struggles. But human connections matter. I learned this too late for my own family, but perhaps my failure can support someone else's success. Clear skies and steady seeing. Theodore Whitmore. Rachel's hands shook as she sorted through the documents beneath Whitmore's letter. Bond certificates with decades of accumulated interest. Stock in companies that had since grown enormously. Real estate deeds for properties Whitmore had owned across 3 states. An official trust document outlining the conditions verified observatory restoration, confirmed by photograph and professional assessment that would trigger asset transfer to the current property owner. The total value, calculated roughly in her paralegal's mind, converting vintage numbers to current worth, made her head spin. Millions, possibly tens of millions, hidden for 15 years, while Whitmore's relatives fought over his official estate, while the observatory decayed, while the county struggled with an unwanted property, waiting for someone desperate enough, determined enough, crazy enough to see possibility instead of burden. Rachel sat in the small, sealed room, surrounded by a dead astronomer's hidden fortune, and began to laugh. Not hysterical, not disbelieving, but with the deep satisfaction of someone who'd just received cosmic validation for every impossible decision. She'd gambled everything on a condemned building. She'd moved her homeless children into an unsafe structure. She'd worked herself beyond exhaustion, making impossible repairs. She'd refused to surrender when any reasonable person would have conceded defeat. And the universe, through Theodore Whitmore's eccentric planning, had just rewarded that stubborn determination with generational wealth. Rachel carefully gathered the most important documents: the trust, paperwork, sample certificates, Whitmore's letter, and climbed back through the access hatch. On the observation platform, she stood beneath the open dome, staring at the stars that had obsessed Whitmore enough to create this place, to hide his fortune here, to believe someone would eventually care as he had. "Thank you," she whispered upward, unsure if she addressed Whitmore's memory, or the indifferent universe, or simply the improbable chain of circumstances that had led her here. Below, her children's voices continued their evening routines, unaware their lives had just transformed more completely than any of them could imagine. Rachel descended the stairs, documents clutched to her chest, her mind already racing through implications. The funds would need legal authentication, that trust verification requirement. But with her paralegal knowledge and the Morrison firm's resources, that seemed manageable rather than impossible. The real question was what came next. She thought of Miguel, of the life insurance that had covered medical bills, but left nothing for their children's futures, of the dreams they'd shared for their family education, security, opportunity, of his death cutting short all those possibilities. Now, impossibly, those dreams were restored, better than restored, amplified, beyond anything they dared hope, even in their most optimistic moments. Rachel found her children in the main room, Maya helping the twins with bedtime preparations, while Sophia read by lamplight. They looked up as she entered, noting something in her expression. "Mom?" Maya asked cautiously. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong," Rachel managed, her voice unsteady with emotion. I need to tell you something. All of you, sit down." They gathered in their customary circle, the 5 of them on sleeping bags in the warm sphere of lantern and heater light. Rachel spread Whitmore's letter before them, reading it aloud, then carefully explained what she'd discovered. The children's reactions ranged from confused, the twins, to stunned, Sophia, to quietly calculating Maya, her oldest daughter's expression showing rapid assessment of implications. "We're rich?" Lucas finally asked, reducing the complex situation to 6-year-old simplicity. "Maybe," Rachel cautioned. "The documents need authentication. The trust requirements need verification. There's legal process involved. But yes, potentially, we're going to be okay financially. More than okay." "What does that mean?" Sophia pressed. "Can we go back to normal? Get a real house? Go to regular school?" Rachel considered carefully. They could do all those things, return to conventional living, abandon this mountain sanctuary, use Whitmore's hidden fortune to rejoin the world they'd fallen from. But as she looked around their circular room in this impossible building they'd claimed through desperation and determination, Rachel recognized something important. This place had saved them, not just physically, but spiritually. They'd built something here worth preserving, a different kind of normal, perhaps, but valuable precisely because they'd created it themselves. "We can do whatever we choose," Rachel said finally. "But I think we stay here. We restore this observatory properly. We honor what Mr. Whitmore hoped for. And we prove that sometimes the greatest treasures are the ones everyone else overlooked." Maya nodded slowly, understanding. "Like us. Everyone overlooked us until we proved we mattered. Exactly like us." That night, after her children finally slept, Rachel climbed once more to the observation platform. She opened the dome with familiar motions, the mechanism responding smoothly, and stood beneath the winter stars. From homeless to homeowners, from desperate to secure, from surviving to thriving. The transformation seemed too rapid, too complete, too much like a fairy tale rather than reality. But Rachel's hands bore calluses from labor. Her muscles ached from weeks of construction work. Her mind carried every difficult decision, every moment of doubt overcome, every small victory accumulated into larger success. They'd earned this through courage and stubbornness and refusal to accept defeat, through loving each other fiercely enough to attempt the impossible, through seeing possibility where everyone else saw only burden. Rachel thought of her mother-in-law during that terrible eviction, of Margaret's cruel certainty that Sarah and her children were worthless, of Robert's dismissive assurance that without their reluctant charity, she'd be nothing. How wrong they'd been. How completely, utterly wrong. The irony was almost perfect. The family that had thrown them away now probably lived in the same house, unaware that the granddaughter-in-law they'd discarded had just claimed a fortune that dwarfed their own wealth. But Rachel felt no desire for revenge, no interest in flaunting success. That chapter of her life had closed. The Morrisons were irrelevant to her future, their cruelty transformed into the very desperation that had driven her to unlikely success. Instead, Rachel felt only gratitude. For Dorothy at the shelter, for Janet Morrison's unexpected investment, for Dr. Chen's professional risk-taking, for Theodore Whitmore's eccentric faith in future observers, for every person who'd chosen kindness when indifference would have been easier, and most of all, for her children, for Maya's quiet strength, for Sophia's resilience, for the twins' persistent joy despite circumstances that should have crushed it. They'd believed in her when she'd barely believed in herself, supporting her impossible decisions with trust she'd struggled to earn. "We did it, babies," Rachel whispered to the stars, to Miguel's memory, to whatever forces governed unlikely outcomes. "We actually did it." A shooting star blazed across the visible sky, the third she'd seen from this platform, each one arriving at significant moments. Rachel smiled, no longer needing to make wishes. Her greatest wish had already been granted. Her family together, safe, whole, loved. The future stretched before them like the cosmos, overhead, vast, unknowable, full of infinite possibility. Whatever came next, whatever challenges or joys awaited, they would face them from a foundation of security built through their own determination. The abandoned observatory with its hidden treasure had given them more than wealth. It had given them proof that sometimes the universe rewards those stubborn enough to keep fighting when defeat seems certain, that overlooked places and dismissed people contain value others miss through their own limited vision. That home isn't a building but a choice to stay together, to support each other, to create beauty and purpose from whatever circumstances provide. Rachel descended the stairs one final time, sealing the dome overhead until tomorrow's viewing session. In the morning, she would begin the legal process of claiming Whitmore's trust. She would plan long-term restoration of the observatory. She would figure out how to balance new wealth with the lessons learned through poverty. But tonight, she simply lay down among her sleeping children in their warm, circular room, pulling them close in the darkness, feeling their steady breathing and steady heartbeats that had sustained her through every impossible decision. They were home. They were together. They were safe. Everything else was just details to be worked out, one day at a time, under the stars that had witnessed their transformation from abandoned to extraordinary. The observatory stood on its mountain, its dome open to the night sky, sheltering 5 souls who had learned that sometimes the greatest treasures are found not by those who search for them, but by those desperate enough to see value where others see only burden. And somewhere in the cosmos, Theodore Whitmore had devoted his life to mapping. The indifferent stars continued their ancient dance, occasionally sending shooting stars streaking across the darkness, small gestures of beauty, reminding observers that wonder persists, regardless of circumstance, constant and free, to any who take the time to look upward. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.